Imagine you meet someone and, at first, everything feels normal. They seem kind, attentive, maybe even charming. Then, little by little, something changes. You start questioning yourself. You apologize more often. You feel nervous before speaking. You replay conversations in your head at night. You can't quite explain what's wrong, but somehow you've become smaller, quieter, less certain of yourself. That's the thing about emotional abuse. It rarely begins with someone screaming in your face. It usually begins with something so subtle that you don't even realize it's happening. Emotional abuse isn't one behavior. It's a collection of tactics designed to gain control, create dependency, lower self-worth, and slowly reshape another person's perception of themselves and reality. The reason so many people stay in emotionally abusive relationships isn't because they've liked to do self, weak or unintelligent. It's because emotional abuse changes the way you think about yourself and the way you interpret what's happening around you. One of the first forms of emotional abuse is constant criticism. This isn't normal feedback. This isn't someone saying, "I think you made a mistake." This is a steady drip of comments that slowly convince you that you're never enough. You're too sensitive. You're too emotional. You're lazy. You're selfish. You're not ambitious enough. You never do anything right. At first, you defend yourself. Then you explain yourself. Eventually, you start believing it. The goal isn't to help you improve. The goal is to weaken your confidence. Confident people are harder to control. The next form is humiliation. This happens when someone embarrasses you, mocks you, makes jokes at your expense, or belittles your intelligence, appearance, or abilities. The most dangerous version of this is public humiliation, because now the abuse has witnesses. Maybe they insult you in front of friends and then say, "I was just kidding." Maybe they make comments about your body. Maybe they imitate your voice to make you look foolish. The phrase, "I was joking," has protected a lot of abusive behavior. If every joke leaves one person feeling smaller, it isn't humor. It's control. Then there's name-calling. People underestimate this because it seems simple. But labels matter. When someone repeatedly calls you stupid, crazy, lazy, useless, dramatic, or pathetic, they're creating an identity. Human beings often become whatever labels they hear often enough. Words shape self-concept. Another type is intimidation. This doesn't always involve physical violence. It can be slamming doors, punching walls, breaking objects, standing too close, blocking an exit, driving recklessly during arguments. The message is simple. I don't need to hurt you. I only need you to believe that I could. Fear is one of the most powerful forms of control. Then we get into something more subtle, withholding affection. One day they're warm. The next day they're cold. No explanation. No discussion. They simply withdraw emotionally. No texts. No eye contact. No affection. No kindness. This creates anxiety because humans are wired to seek connection. The victim begins chasing approval. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? The person withholding affection suddenly becomes the source of both pain and relief. That's a powerful position. Then there's the silent treatment. People often confuse this with needing space. They're different. Healthy space includes communication. I need an hour to calm down. The silent treatment is punishment. It's emotional exile. You don't know what happened. You don't know how long it will last. You don't know what rule you broke. The uncertainty becomes torture. Your brain starts obsessing over repairing the connection. Another form is emotional neglect. This happens when your feelings, needs, and experiences are consistently ignored. You say you're hurt. They change the subject. You say you're scared. They dismiss it. You cry. They act annoyed. Eventually, you stop expressing your emotions altogether. You become emotionally invisible. Then there's minimization. You explain why something hurt you. They say, "It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Everyone goes through that. You need tougher skin." The issue isn't whether your feelings make sense to them. The issue is that your emotional experience is being denied. And when your feelings are repeatedly denied, you begin denying them yourself. Then we move into one of the most discussed forms of emotional abuse, gaslighting. Gaslighting is the manipulation of someone's perception of reality. It sounds like this. "That never happened. I never said that. You're imagining things. You're remembering it wrong. You're crazy." Over time, you stop trusting your own memory. You start depending on the other person to tell you what's real. Think about how dangerous that is. If someone can control your perception of reality, they can control almost everything else. Then there's blame shifting. No matter what happens, somehow it becomes your fault. They lied because you made them do it. They yelled because you upset them. They cheated because you weren't attentive enough. They became angry because you're too sensitive. Accountability disappears. The victim becomes responsible for everything. Another form is guilt manipulation. This is incredibly common. If you loved me, you'd do this. After everything I've done for you, I guess I just don't matter to you. You always disappoint me. The goal is to make your boundaries feel selfish. Eventually, saying no begins to feel cruel. Then there is emotional blackmail. This takes guilt and turns it into a weapon. If you leave, I'll ruin my life. If you don't do this, something terrible will happen. You'll regret this forever. The message is, you are responsible for my emotions and my choices. You are not. No one has that kind of power over another person. Another form is isolation. Abusive people often dislike competition. Friends are competition. Family is competition. Coworkers are competition. Anyone who could support you is a threat. So they start slowly. I don't think your friend likes me. Your family doesn't respect our relationship. You spend too much time with other people. Eventually, your world becomes smaller. The more isolated you become, the easier you are to control. Then there is jealousy disguised as love. People often mistake possessiveness for affection. Who were you texting? Why are you wearing that? Why did you smile at them? I just care about you. No. Control and care are not the same thing. Love does not require surveillance. Then there's monitoring. Checking your phone. Demanding passwords. Tracking your location. Reading your messages. Questioning your every movement. Some people call this trust issues. It isn't. It's control. Another form of emotional abuse is unpredictability. One day the person is wonderful. The next day they're angry. The next day they're affectionate again. This creates something psychologists sometimes call intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. You never know when the reward is coming. So you keep trying. You become emotionally hooked. Then there's excessive criticism disguised as helping. I'm only telling you this because I care. I'm trying to make you better. No one else will be honest with you. The criticism never ends. Nothing is ever enough. Eventually, you begin seeing yourself through their eyes. Another form is comparison. Why can't you be like your brother? My ex never did this. Other people don't have this problem. Comparisons are designed to create inadequacy. You begin competing against impossible standards. Then there's constant correction. Every word you say is wrong. Every decision is wrong. Every opinion is wrong. You stop speaking up because it's exhausting. You start asking permission for things you never needed permission for before. Then we get to emotional invalidation. This one is everywhere. You feel hurt. They tell you your feelings are wrong. You feel anxious. They tell you you're dramatic. You feel disappointed. They tell you to get over it. Eventually, you stop trusting your emotions. And when people stop trusting themselves, they become easier to influence. Another type is financial control, used emotionally. This doesn't always mean stealing money. It can mean making someone feel guilty for spending, monitoring every purchase, creating dependency, using finances as leverage. Money becomes another method of control. Then there's withholding information. Important details are hidden. Conversations happen without you. Decisions are made without you. You're intentionally kept in the dark. Confusion becomes normal. Another tactic is moving the goalposts. No matter what you do, the standards change. You clean the house. Now it wasn't clean enough. You apologize. Now your apology wasn't sincere enough. You improve. Now the expectations are higher. You can never win, because winning was never the point. Control was the point. Then there's projection. The person accuses you of what they're doing. They lie and accuse you of lying. They're unfaithful and accuse you of cheating. They're manipulative and call you manipulative. Projection creates confusion. You end up defending yourself while ignoring their behavior. Another type is excessive sarcasm. Every criticism is hidden inside a joke. Every insult comes with a smile. Every cruel statement has plausible deniability. If you react, you're too sensitive. If you don't react, the behavior continues. Then there's keeping score. Every mistake you've ever made is remembered. Every argument becomes a history lesson. Nothing is forgiven. The past becomes ammunition. This creates a sense that you can never truly move forward. Another form is dismissing accomplishments. You succeed. They change the subject. You achieve something important. They minimize it. You celebrate. They point out your flaws. The goal is to prevent confidence from growing. Confident people are difficult to dominate. Then there's using vulnerability against someone. You share your fears. Later, those fears are weaponized. You share your insecurities. Later, they become insults. Trust becomes dangerous. Eventually, you stop opening up. Then we have conditional love. I'll love you if. I'll support you when. I'll approve of you after. Real love is not a reward for perfect behavior. Conditional affection creates anxiety and perfectionism. You start performing for approval. Then there is creating dependency. The person slowly convinces you that you can't survive without them. No one else would want you. You'd be lost without me. You'll never make it on your own. This is one of the most damaging forms of emotional abuse because it attacks your sense of capability. Then there is manufactured helplessness. The abuser handles everything, makes every decision, takes over every responsibility. At first, it feels helpful. Later, you realize you no longer trust yourself to make choices. Then there is character assassination. The person attacks who you are instead of discussing behavior. Instead of saying, I didn't like what you did, they say, you're a terrible person. You're selfish. You're broken. Identity attacks are incredibly powerful because behavior can change. Identity feels permanent. Another form is creating confusion. The rules constantly change. Expectations shift. Messages contradict each other. You spend so much energy trying to understand what you have happening that you have little energy left to protect yourself. Confused people are easier to control. Then there's emotional dumping. Every problem becomes yours. Every crisis becomes yours. Every emotion becomes yours. You become an emotional caretaker. Your needs disappear. Your role becomes managing someone else's feelings. Another tactic is forced loyalty. You're expected to defend them no matter what. Agree with them no matter what. Support them no matter what. Disagreement becomes betrayal. Then there's punishment through withdrawal. Love disappears when you disagree. Attention disappears when you set boundaries. Kindness disappears when you become independent. You learn a dangerous lesson. Being yourself costs connection. Then there is chronic criticism of your memory. That's not what happened. Quote. You never remember anything correctly. You always get confused. This can become a form of gaslighting. Over time, people begin documenting conversations because they no longer trust themselves. Another form is attacking boundaries. You say no. They push. You say stop. They continue. You ask for space. They refuse. Every ignored boundary sends the same message. Your needs don't matter. Then, there's emotional triangulation. A third person is constantly brought into the relationship. Even my friends think you're wrong. My family agrees with me. Everyone says you're difficult. This creates social pressure and isolation at the same time. Another form is turning affection into a reward. Kindness becomes transactional. Love becomes transactional. Attention becomes transactional. You begin working for scraps of approval. Then there's emotional unpredictability, so severe that you begin scanning for danger. You study facial expressions, tone of voice, footsteps. You become hypervigilant. This is one of the signs that emotional abuse has been occurring for a long time. Your nervous system stops feeling safe. Then there is rewriting history. Past events are constantly changed. Promises are denied. Agreements disappear. Memories become arguments. Reality itself begins to feel unstable. Another form is making someone responsible for your happiness. You need to make me happy. You caused my sadness. You ruined my day. This creates an impossible burden because no one can regulate another person's emotional world 24 hours a day. Then there is chronic disapproval. Nothing is ever enough. No achievement matters. No effort counts. No progress satisfies. You begin living in a permanent state of trying to earn acceptance. And that may be the deepest wound emotional abuse creates. It teaches people that love must be earned, that safety must be earned, that worth must be earned. But healthy relationships don't operate that way. Healthy relationships allow mistakes. Healthy relationships allow disagreement. Healthy relationships respect boundaries. Healthy relationships encourage independence. Healthy relationships make you feel more like yourself, not less. One of the simplest questions you can ask yourself is this: who am I becoming around this person? Am I becoming more confident? Or more anxious? More authentic? Or more guarded? More peaceful? Or more afraid? Emotional abuse changes identity slowly. You don't wake up one day and suddenly realize it happened. You notice that you no longer laugh the same. You no longer speak the same. You no longer trust yourself the same. You no longer recognize the person you've become. And that's why recognizing these patterns matters. Because once you can name a behavior, you can stop normalizing it. Once you can identify manipulation, you can begin setting boundaries. Once you understand that confusion, guilt, fear, and constant self-doubt may not be personality flaws but responses to unhealthy dynamics, you can begin rebuilding trust in yourself and remembering something that emotional abuse tries very hard to erase. Your thoughts matter, your feelings matter, your boundaries matter, and your reality deserves to be trusted. I'll continue, but I'll keep it grounded and not turn it into endless filler. This is already covering the full system pretty deeply. When someone has been exposed to emotional abuse for a long time, what often happens next is not immediate anger or escape. It's normalization. The mind adapts. It lowers expectations. It begins to reinterpret pain as just how relationships are. This is where many people get stuck. Not because they don't see problems, but because the problems no longer feel serious enough to justify action. That shift is one of the most powerful outcomes of repeated emotional invalidation. You start saying things like, "It's not that bad. Maybe I'm overthinking. They have good sides too. Everyone has issues." And all of those statements can be true in isolation. But the pattern matters more than the moments, because emotional abuse is not defined by one argument, one insult, or one bad day. It's defined by repetition, imbalance, and the gradual erosion of psychological safety. One of the clearest signs that someone is in an emotionally abusive dynamic is this. They begin editing themselves before they speak. They rehearse sentences in their mind. They calculate reactions before expressing needs. They soften their truth so it won't create conflict. They apologize preemptively. That internal editing process is not random. It's learned behavior developed in environments where honesty previously led to punishment, rejection, or escalation. Over time, silence feels safer than expression. And when silence feels safer than expression, identity starts shrinking. Because identity requires expression. Without expression, a person becomes a managed version of themselves instead of an authentic one. Another deeper layer is emotional disconnection from the body. People often describe it like this: I feel numb. I can't tell what I feel anymore. I don't know if I'm overreacting or if something is actually wrong. I second-guess everything. That confusion is not a character flaw. It's what happens when external feedback consistently overrides internal signals. When someone repeatedly tells you your feelings are wrong, your nervous system stops trusting itself. This is why victims of emotional abuse often look for external validation before making even small decisions. Not because they are incapable, but because their internal reference system has been destabilized. Another pattern that appears is hyper-responsibility. This is when a person starts believing, if they are upset, it's my fault. If something goes wrong, I caused it. If I had acted differently, everything would be fine. This mindset is not healthy accountability. It is an overextension of responsibility, trained through repeated blame shifting. Because when you are consistently blamed for things outside your control, your brain adapts by trying to control everything to prevent future punishment. But control becomes exhausting, and exhaustion leads to anxiety. And anxiety reinforces the cycle. This is why emotional abuse and anxiety disorders often coexist, not because one causes the other in a simple linear way, but because chronic psychological unpredictability trains the brain to stay on alert. The nervous system begins to operate as if danger is always nearby. Heart rate increases during simple conversations. Tone of voice becomes highly significant. Facial expressions are analyzed for meaning. Silence is interpreted as threat. This is not imagination. This is conditioning. Another important dynamic is intermittent reinforcement. This is one of the strongest psychological hooks in human behavior. When kindness, approval, or affection is given unpredictably, the brain becomes more attached, not less. So in emotionally abusive dynamics, there are often cycles: distance, affection, criticism, affection, withdrawal, reconciliation. This inconsistency creates emotional dependency, because the brain starts chasing the good version of the person, not realizing that the cycle itself is the mechanism of control. The hope for return of affection becomes the hook that maintains the connection. Another subtle but powerful form of emotional abuse is identity rewriting. This is when a person slowly begins to define you. They tell you who you are. You're too emotional. You're the difficult one. You're the problem in relationships. You can't handle things. If repeated often enough, these labels begin to replace self-perception. And once identity is externally defined, autonomy weakens. Because if you believe, "I am the problem," you stop questioning the system around you. Another layer is boundary fatigue. Every time a boundary is set and ignored, something internal changes. At first, the reaction is anger, then frustration, then negotiation, then exhaustion, then silence. That final stage, silence, is often mistaken for peace, but it is actually depletion. The person is no longer setting boundaries, not because everything is okay, but because they no longer believe boundaries will work. That is a critical turning point in abusive dynamics. Because once boundaries stop being enforced, the imbalance becomes structural. Another pattern worth understanding is emotional minimization through logic. This sounds like, "You're being irrational." That doesn't make sense. You're too emotional to see clearly. On the surface, this appears rational. But underneath, it invalidates emotional experience by framing it as inferior to logic. Healthy communication includes both logic and emotion. Emotional abuse often separates them and elevates one over the other, to dismiss lived back experience. Another common pattern is selective memory. The abusive individual may remember every mistake you made in detail, but forget every harm they caused. This asymmetry creates a distorted moral scoreboard, where one person is always behind. That imbalance prevents resolution because the past is never neutral. It is weaponized. Over time, the person experiencing these patterns often develops what feels like internal fragmentation. Part of them wants to leave. Part of them wants to stay. Part of them feels guilty. Part of them feels angry. Part of them still remembers the good version of the relationship. This internal conflict is not confusion in the usual sense. It is cognitive dissonance created by contradictory emotional experiences tied to the same person. And the more intense the cycle, the stronger the attachment can become, not because it is healthy, but because the brain struggles to reconcile threat and comfort from the same source. One moment safety, one moment fear, one moment love, one moment rejection. This pattern conditions attachment at a deep neurological level. Breaking out of it is not simply about awareness. Awareness is the first step, but the nervous system also has to unlearn the expectation of volatility. That is why recovery often involves rebuilding trust in one's own perceptions first. Learning to recognize, what I feel is real, what I experienced matters. I don't need external permission to validate my internal signals. Because emotional abuse does not just harm relationships, it disrupts self-trust. And when self-trust is damaged, decision-making becomes difficult, boundaries become unclear, and emotional stability becomes dependent on external input. Rebuilding that internal reference system is often the beginning of real recovery. It starts small, noticing discomfort without dismissing it, naming emotions without judging them, recognizing patterns without rationalizing them away, and slowly, consistently, re-establishing the connection between perception and truth. Because once a person starts trusting their internal signals again, the entire structure of manipulation loses its grip.